So, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Tracy Stein. As always, I'm so happy to be here with you. But today I am especially excited to be here with you. And you're going to be excited too, because my guest is Damien Ball. Now, Damian is very modest, so I'm going to give a very brief introduction, but you'll get to feel like you know him by the end of this interview. So my friend and yours, Damien Ball, is a designer, landscape designer, philosopher, and plant lover. And he's had such an interesting journey. I first met Damien years ago now, when you completely transformed our home and our landscape after Hurricane Sandy came and really ravaged it. So you're kind of the person who brings landscapes to life in my mind, and many other things on top of that. So without further ado, welcome, Damien.
Well, thanks for having me, Tracy.
So
I'm
good
very
to
excited
see
to be
you.
here.
Yay. Oh, that's great.
It's been, I think it's been almost 10 years now. I think that was 2012, 2013?
I don't,
Your shore house?
yeah, I think so. It might have been even earlier. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was huge. And, just for people who weren't in the Northeast during Hurricane Sandy, I mean, literally cars were floating in the streets and, landscapes, property, blocks and blocks and blocks away from the water were saturated with salt water. Between that and winds, it really changed, the landscapes around us. And honestly, it was such a great opportunity to create something beautiful. And that's how we met you. We had this 1880 historic home in this historic community and not a terribly big piece of property, but we wanted to make the landscape kind of reminiscent of an English garden and feel very healing to be in. And you did that so beautifully. I mean, you really are an artist in the truest sense of the word.
Oh, thank you, Tracy. I think one of the most important parts as far as for, design for me is how receptive the client is to actually creating art. And I think that's what made it easy for us is when I showed up, you knew not what you wanted to see, but it was more of how you wanted to feel when you were in that space. And, for me, that is art, being able to create that, that space that you can kind of live in and grow in and interact with. And the fact that not only were you receptive to that, but you almost guided that in a way, it just made it very easy. And of course, in the other landscapes that I did for you after that as well, it was an easy a palette.
Well, I mean, honestly, I had some sort of vague sense of how we hoped to feel and the kind of some of the colors and the plant life we wanted to have. But really, it was such an education working with you. And we'll talk about that because, you were the first person I ever met who showed up and had looked up not only the history of our homes at the times that you were working with us, but also the history of the area, what was native to the area, but also how could we create something that felt very, very personal that still fit in with the surrounding landscape. Really just beautiful. You introduced me to plants like Baptisia, and hornbeams and, Russian sage. And, you created this beautiful palette of plant life. And I wanted to have us talk about how healing nature and the natural world can be, and landscape design and gardening for people who do it, or just being in nature, because there's such a trend right now toward things like eco-psychology and planning, even in urban environments, even in commercial spaces. It's so different now than it was, I think, even 10, 15, 20 years ago. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a couple different ways to approach, you know, discussions like landscape design and gardens and things like that. You've got the art side of it, what it actually takes to create a piece of work like a landscape design, and then all of the things that come along with building that, so that you could present it in a way that the customer likes what they see, and then they want to actually create that piece of living work. And then you have the part of gardening and landscape and nature, like you said, the more healing, spiritual aspect of just being in the world, touching plants and experiencing them, not only visually, but smelling them. And I really like planting for textures. Even if I'm walking through gardens, you'll catch me grabbing things and feeling the leaves and the flowers, and just being in that space is just super healing. So that place, that second place that we're talking about, that healing space, is really ultimately what that art is supposed to create for people. And that's what I've always how I've tried to approach design for people, is by saying, like we were just saying, not what, look, a lot of people can go on Houzz and some of these websites and pick out things that they like. And then they would like to, at first, piece those things together, like almost like a paper mache picture. And it often doesn't work, because you're creating a living work of art that's not only going to look a certain way when you install it, but it's going to transform over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So, it's complicated, to create those things. And really it's, the only way to go about it is to bite it off in small pieces, and to really start simply. And that's by having a conversation with someone and saying, how do you want to feel in this space? How do you imagine yourself using this space? Some people might say, look, I have severe allergies and I don't want to see a single flower, and I love to cook and host parties. And I immediately have to switch gears, because that's not at all how I would normally design a space, but that's what they might need, to really feel joy in their space. So, lucky for me, when I met you guys, you were, we were aligned on a lot of things. So it was like a super enjoyable to not only learn what kind of space you wanted to have and exist in, but also, learn about what you and Jason loved, and what kind of things you want to, experience over time in your landscapes. Yeah. When it comes to the more spiritual aspect, the mental health part of gardening, there is a lot of research on it, and I think a lot of people are sort of heading in that direction. I mean, currently, for my day job, I build a lot of large scale things in the 5 boroughs in New York, and I've noticed a lot of the landscape architects are doing a lot more of native planting and a lot more of large grove planting, which just moves and again, I think now they're planning for the experience, not for just the visual. That looks great, and moving on. They want a space that's going to draw people in, where you could sit, have an emotive response to this work of art, and stay or leave or whatever. But recently, I have found myself, rather than pushing the idea of designing and installing a design that I create, I almost encourage people to allow me to design and receive delivery of the materials. And if they can manage it, do a lot of it themselves, because it's a great experience. Not only, to me, it's like the kind of similar to the feeling you get when you get a small pet, or even a fish, something really simple to take care of. And just the act of caring for it and interacting with it, you start to discover things about this simple little being that you never would have imagined would have created, this endorphin release, and it's something so simple, but, something as simple as planting, I don't know, a sunflower seed and watching the way it changes and reacts
Yes.
to the world around it just makes you more mindful, not only your own place in the world, but of how other things experience the world that you're experiencing, and then how you're experiencing that thing. And, I don't want to get too crazy, but I mean, I really think that a lot of these plants are conscious. Like, I think
they are.
They have a form of experience that's beyond what we would, your normal 8th grade classification system of, response to stimuli and that sort of thing. But, well, it's alive. Yeah, but it's conscious, I've been with plants enough to know that these things are not only reacting to the world, but they are reacting to you specifically. Which sounds a little wild, but there is a lot of, I don't want to sound like I'm really, just so you know, I'm really bad with references.
That's okay.
So I can give you a list later of all these things that I'm touching on, but there actually is data out there showing that, these things are, in a way conscious and are reacting to you. Not the exact same way. It's not the same consciousness, but it is
who knows,
sort of consciousness. Yeah.
So people who are listening on like a streaming app versus watching on YouTube are not aware that I've been nodding quite a bit, but it's totally true. And you and I are going to be, we're both, by the way, neither one of us is high, but it's going to maybe sound a little bit like that. We're going to go down some like really wild roads.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I was thinking when you were just talking about the consciousness of plants, because that was going to be for later in the discussion, but why not hit it now? Did you ever read that book, The Secret Life of Plants? If you haven't, I have it somewhere. Yes. You would be the only other person I would know that actually would have read it.
Yeah. And I have another one. Again, I'm terrible with references, but I just read it probably about a month ago. It's that same concept, but it's a little bit farther along, where there's a gentleman who wrote the book, who is currently conducting research in Spain, has a lab where his prime focus is proving plant consciousness, right? And one of the demonstrations that he's famous for doing is he gets an anesthesia and puts what's the plant? I can't remember the plant, but it's a plant that reacts to stimuli like immediately.
Okay.
So for example, if you touch the leaf, it will close. Okay. And it's not a Venus flytrap, but it's similar. It reacts similar and as fast.
Okay.
And in front of an audience, he will put a small cotton ball in a jar with the plant that has an anesthetic, and within minutes he pulls the lid back off, touches the plant, and there's no reaction. So
wow,
it's actually slowed down its response and is anesthetized as if it were a conscious being.
Right.
So that's not direct evidence, but it's a sign of something deeper than I think your normal plants are just simply can be considered a part of life, as opposed to an actual, like, I don't want to use the word sentient, but it's conscious.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. I haven't read The Secret Life of Plants in a very long time. It's a very old book. I can't remember if it was written in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but I'll have to go look it up after we finish. But one of the things I was struck by when I read this book like 30 years ago is that, the experimenters who were doing this work didn't set out thinking, oh, plants have a consciousness. But they noticed that if you put electrodes to a plant, it would react differently if, when the dog or a cat came into the room, I can't remember which, or when somebody was about to burn a leaf, or even harm the leaf of another plant nearby. And in fact, these plants reacted when people walked into the room with the intention to do these things, which to me, goes down a road I've gone down on this podcast and even more on my other one. But not only that plants are conscious, but that they have relationships. And we know they do too, right? Because we could talk about the underground network of plant life and fungi or fungi. I always get that wrong. Um, and but also that they had a connect. I mean, they were that their consciousness was non-local, and that's a whole other thing. But that whole kind of quantum mechanics idea of we are not just our brains. As people, we are able to tap into awareness outside of ourselves and distant in space and time. And the idea with some of these experiments in the secret life of plants was that, well, their consciousness wasn't limited to what they were able to directly observe either. They were able to anticipate what had not yet been demonstrated. And these are, organisms without eyes or ears or brains that we know of. So anyway, that's kind of my tangent on that. We got real deep, real fast, or real out there, real fast. Depends on your perspective. But your connection to nature and plant life is also very, very profound. It is personal. It is meaningful. It is art, but it is beyond that. And it is design, but it is beyond that. And it is, being someone who is knowledgeable about plants, but that doesn't even seem to really capture it. Personally, I don't think.
I think that's probably right. I mean, I don't know how far I've gone in analyzing that in myself, but I do know that, if I were to pull up to someone's home, I can immediately sense what plants are struggling and what aren't. I mean, I don't even need to look. I mean, it's just a sense that I don't know that I've developed it over time. I've always had it. I can't explain it, but I can actually feel, there is a connection there, and I don't know how to explain that, but, I should say that, the philosopher part of me can't let go the idea of the fact that we're using consciousness a lot. And the word consciousness, and I should say that we don't know what plant consciousness would look like, but I also don't think we're even close to knowing what our own consciousness looks like. So really, when I use the word consciousness for plants, I think what I'm saying, and to the point you're making, I think there's more to the way they interact with their surroundings that's very similar to the way we do. I think we overestimate our own consciousness, and I think we underestimate the consciousness of other things around us. And I think there's a lot more similarities there than we realize, which can lead you to places. I went to hopefully this isn't too far of a tangent, but I went to a lecture. I love this one philosopher, Chalmers. He's been in talks about consciousness for decades. He's the pretty much the main man who he pioneered quite a bit when talking about consciousness. So I happened to notice that he was at my daughter's school. And so I asked her, I was like, look, is there any way you can get me into this lecture? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So my wife and daughter and I are sitting there, and at the end they get to a Q&A, and they're, I had all these questions, but of course he was, like, let's let students ask first. And of course we never got to anybody else, which is great, because the students of course had the better questions. But I was such a proud father, because the question she asked was exactly what I was like struggling with. And she was like, who are we to decide that our consciousness is the point of reference for what is conscious? And, he was more leaning towards, he was more talking about AI and things like that. There's a lot of questions, of course, around that these days. And I feel the same way, when talking about other things in the world, like plants and really everything. I mean, not just plants. I mean, I could extend this idea far beyond, interaction with plants. But, when you start to ask questions like, who are we to decide that our measure of consciousness is, that opens up the door to ask other questions like, should we be eating animals? Should we be planting monocultures and destroying the environment that way? It really, it opens up a lot of things that you wouldn't normally be thinking about, or even provide any kind of justification to believing this. But, I think it helps kind of fuel the fire for really important questions for our future.
Beautifully said. And just for everybody listening, could you define monoculture? Because I know that a lot of people probably aren't familiar with the term.
Yeah, I really, it's just planting one thing. I mean, our nature is diverse, and it needs every part of itself. And uh, that's why there's lately, and I'm so happy for it. There's a big push to get rid of lawns and
Yes.
wildflowers, and that's because lawns do everything bad for the environment. I mean, they collect chemicals.
Most people don't know that, so definitely talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, well, in order to have a green lawn of tall fescue that's cut and prim and pristine and green, you have to fertilize it because it is a monoculture essentially, and it's going to wipe out the soil of nutrition. The main nutrition is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. Nitrogen is essentially what makes everything green. Phosphorus is what everything is blooming and rooting, and potash is for hardiness of the plant, right? So it's nice and strong. And the roots are just so deep, and it's cut just so high, and water just runs off, and water wants to be absorbed into the soil, and it wants to be absorbed into the plant life, and it's a system. It's an ecosystem, but it needs to have all these processes. When you eliminate 9/10 of nature to one particular thing, you're just simply going to run into problems. I mean, it's very simple. So I don't know why lawns are so popular. I mean, I have it, and I'm for some reason committed to going out there every week and cutting it. I know why I shouldn't, but maybe it's because of the price. I mean, look, seeds right now for growing wildflower gardenings are not cheap. I think some of the best lawns are the ones that have that you see in some of these large like estate gardens where they have like a meadow, wildflowers growing, supporting wildlife, not just the bees but everything. There's a lot of birds that thrive in certain heights of flora, and all that to say, planting millions of acres of corn in the middle of the country, I don't know that that's really sustainable. It's the same idea. You plant one thing, you can't have interaction, and the fertilizers, the nitrogen, the potash, all that stuff is depleted, and the only way to maintain that monoculture is by adding chemicals to it. I mean, it's the way things are, and it's not great.
And I think most people don't realize that when you have a monoculture like a lawn or something else, you're using, for one normal lawn, like thousands and thousands of gallons of water just to sustain something that is completely ornamental. And that really does not support, the natural world around it. And I'm not an expert. I'm not going to say it nearly as well as you will. But, like in our community, we've started adopting no mow May, which means during the month of May, people are asked not to mow or at least reduce their mowing. But the idea, I mean,
that's cool.
And we didn't originate it. It's been going on in different places around the country, but it's not without controversy because some people want to look at a golf course lawn in front of your property. And I understand that people are really conditioned to do that, but not mowing for 1 month allows all kinds of species of bees, not just honeybees, and other insects to have food. I mean, you do see wildflowers pop up. It's really quite beautiful. But we need those insects, to live. We don't want to have places where the natural world cannot coexist with us.
I one of the and please stop me if this is going off on too much of a complete tangent, but one of the things that I've been studying as closely as I possibly can as of late, because I think it applies to just about everything, is this this idea of complexity. Back in the 70s and 80s, there was a group. It was called the Santa Fe Group, and it was a group of scientists and philosophers, economists, And they, long story short, which is kind of a crazy thing to do because it really is an amazing story. They came to the conclusion that our conception of the way things are through causal relationships is faulty. Because what it does is it creates this weird hierarchical top-down control appearance of things. And that's not really the way things are in nature. And it's kind of a negative result because when we treat things with this top-down hierarchy, we treat the things that we're treating poorly because it's really a simple way of understanding things, and it's not how things are in the world. So let me try to give an example to make it more clear. Our body is a great example, right? We just have this assumption that there's one piece in our head, and we make this assumption that our head is the controller because it's where most of our senses are, and we think that this blob of matter is controlling everything within us. If you think simply, obviously our heart and our breathing doesn't have that constant thought process of controlling, but you also have things in your body that are basically controlling themselves. They have nothing to do with you at all. One example would be like gut bacteria. I mean, these are very important parts of your health. Of course, you take it for granted because you don't, I certainly never knew about it up until the last maybe 5-10 years of my life. But without these organisms doing their part, you are, going to live more unhealthy. And it has nothing to do with your control. So there is no causal relationship there. This is a complex system. Now, plant material is another perfect example for me. Nitrogen, I mentioned it before, might cause a plant to be more green. Phosphorus might cause a plant to have more color and more flowers. And yes, that's how I would treat it if I wanted to get some kind of forced results. Those results are always pretty temporary. The most important thing about a plant in its place is if it's in the right place. Well, what's the right place? Well, the right place is a place that plant will grow naturally because of all of the different things that interact. You need the appropriate amount of water, the appropriate amount of temperature swings, the appropriate amount of not only the elements that are in the soil, but the right amount of pH. You see people abusing lime and things like that on lawns to adjust the pH. pH isn't a chemical to affect the plant itself. What it does is it allows the plant to absorb the nutrition that you're putting in the ground. So these are all factors that globally are creating a more happy, healthy plant. And that's why when people say like, my plant is dying and it looks like there's not enough water. Well, there could be a 10,000 different reasons why it looks that way. And it's usually multiple things. The main thing, it's just not in the right place, doing the right thing. As soon as it gets one problem, like spider mites or what have you, it's susceptible to just about anything and everything else, just like we are. If we get sick in one way and we get weaker and our immune system is down, we're susceptible to other things. So, I guess to try and close out where I'm headed with this whole complexity idea, the most important factor about complexity, I think, is that, the prevailing idea before complexity was chaos theory. And that's that if and I'm sure you've heard the whole thing about if the butterfly that flaps its wings can cause a hurricane on the other side of the world, that's fine. Yes, but the problem is you can look at the exploded view, the chaos that results, and you could break it apart all the way to its finest point. But again, that's not really how nature works. It's unusual that you can have different things interact in their smallest parts. You can have complex systems interact and create more complex systems. But here's the unusual part. These systems create something called emergence, which is new things that have never existed before. that's wild. I mean, like, that just like kills me. Like, I can't even believe that this is the case, but it actually is. So, it allows for, I always had this problem with, like, there's not enough time in the history of the universe for things to evolve in a particular kind of way, in a causal way. But it is a fact that new things emerge from complex systems interacting. And this recently was confirmed. This is totally random, but my daughter gave me a book. She's she's really into studying now how to explain Eastern ideas through Western philosophy, which is, I mean,
so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy weight to burden yourself with, but she's doing really well. And there's this ancient, I love like the Upanishads and the Vedantas, like these ancient texts written in Sanskrit. They were saying things like, guys, like I mean, so long ago, they're like, look, everything is one thing, and you are essentially just a collection of perceptions of these things. So stop trying to parse things apart and studying them when you could really just experience it as one thing. But they talk a lot in the Yogasara school of Buddhism about dependent arising. And when I started to read deeper and deeper into that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is emergence. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. So, I think we're getting closer and closer to, as a culture, the more I'm listening to people, I think people are starting to feel that, there are new ways to connect, new ways to understand that we are all, if we're not all one, and it isn't this idea of, the 1975 idea of Gaia, which I kind of like, then at the very least, we're connected in some fundamental way. I don't know. That's my soapbox.
No, it was beautiful, and I couldn't even hope to come close to that, honestly. I mean, and it's why I'm so glad you could take time out of your schedule to be here tonight, because you have such a unique and thoughtful and well-informed and philosophical take on everything. We're all walking through the world, but the same world is experienced so differently by each one of us. And so I really enjoy hearing your experience and learning how it could impact my experience. How it could open my eyes to something that has been before me all along in a new and see it in a new way. And that's what I really hope listeners are going to take from this as well, because really how we got here was talking about, your work with the natural world. And when a thread that I'm kind of taking from some of what you just said is that, there's so much more going on there. It's like going outside and hearing something and calling it music, but it's a symphony. And everything just somehow becomes more multi-layered and beautiful when you have a different framework for looking at it. I'm not sure that even remotely captures what you just said, but
no, I think that's right.
And maybe that's a good place to kind of talk about how you got to where you are, because you're so modest, but you bring such a unique set, not only of skills, but interests, talents. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Yeah. It's been a strange ride. I think, I mean, I wish I could say it was just modesty. I think a large portion of it is that it's just been such a weird journey that, sometimes I look at people who, I work with a lot of people in my current day job who are, I'm basically the non-engineer in this building. And, they went to high school. They were great at math. They went to college. They were like, I'm going to study engineering. And now they're engineers for a living. And they've been doing it for 25 years and they love it, And I just like, sometimes I crave that. I'm like, oh, what a relief that would have been, 30 years ago to know what I was supposed to do and what I wanted to do. But I still have no idea. I'm still trying to figure it out. But, I mean, I guess I've done a lot of, I mean, I was a commodities broker. I was a model scout. I was a semi-professional musician for a short period of time. I was the Trojan rep at spring break in 1999. I was a plumber for 2 years.
For some reason, I didn't remember that.
My wife's father owns a plumbing company. Now my wife's brother, my brother-in-law, and I got fed up with what I was doing at the time, and I stopped everything and just needed to, I don't know, do something that I could learn that was so incredibly practical that it didn't require any kind of like hazy thought. It was like, this is the way it is. And if you don't do it right, it's not going to work. And it just was very, very satisfying for me to do that for a short period of time. But then I was ultimately what sent me down the road of horticulture was I worked on a private estate. Very wealthy guy, had this huge mansion and had existing gardens, that were decades old. So there was a lot of mature plant material there. And the gardener, when I say estate, I mean, they had 15 full-time staff. They
my
had
God.
chefs, nannies, butlers, and they were all, the nannies were from France, the butler was from England, the chef was from France. I might have said that already, but the gardener, he left for whatever reason, and they were kind of like, what are we going to do? We're going to. And I said, don't worry about it. Let me take care of it for a short period of time. If you don't like what I do, then we can move on. And something happened. I just, they had this large Japanese garden area, and I just started reading and just started digesting everything I could about the proper care of that environment and the intention behind why the Japanese garden looks the way it does and why they did it hundreds of years ago. And that informed the way I sculpted and created and brought that back to its original intention. Bamboo gardens, they had an extensive indoor, a lot of indoor gardens, orchids that really, I connected with orchids actually at that time intensely. I started ordering all kinds of orchids, experimenting with different kinds of orchids. So I did that for some time, and then by some time it was probably about 10 years, and I had such an intimate knowledge of all these plants on this estate, and essentially had 10 hours a day with every one of these things, cultivating them and making them happier. That I just was like, I know too much, and I know the way things are supposed to. That's when I started to develop my ideas about design. Now, at this point, I'd already gone to college for advertising from 95 to 99, and this had nothing to do with any of that, obviously. But I was thinking more, my daughter was getting a little bit older, and I thought, I should probably get out into the real world outside of the gates of this estate and see what I can do. And I went to a local design firm and garden center, which was Barlow's. And I knocked on the door and I said, "Look, I need to be a designer. I just know it, and and I've seen the stuff that you guys have done, and I know it's good, and I need a good place to work for." And the owner, he said to me, "Look, he goes, you don't have you don't have the degree, you don't have the real experience." He's like, "I don't see this working." And he goes, "I don't see paying you the salary you're making at this other place to do this here when you don't have any of these things." And I was like, "Look, I'll take half my salary and I'll do it for the first month. And if you don't think that I'm right for this position, then I'll move on. But you don't have to pay me my normal salary." And he was like, "Done. Let's try it." And that first landscape that I planted and designed in that first month ended up winning a PPE award out in Ohio against a whole rash of landscape architects and like major people from around the country. And the owner was like, "This is it. You've proved yourself. You're, whatever you need, do your thing." And I stayed there, and that's actually a couple, a few years into that, I ended up meeting you guys and started, but that's how I ended up at the local scene and at, the Jersey Shore. I was knocking on their door. and decide.
That's so amazing, Damien. And I know your journey is not finished yet, but I want to just interject. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking like, sometimes when people talk, it's like I see there like a map in my mind, or it's like a map of their journey. And, not everybody's journey is very linear. And I think sometimes that's because we're supposed to have these other kind of divergent experiences that make us clear on what it is we really want and help us build something else within us. I'm not afraid to wax new agey, but I really do think I'm going to paraphrase, but that the saying about like the universe conspiring with you to move you along your path, kind of, especially when you're ready. I feel like that actually happens. And your story makes me think of that. Like you were pulled out of things that, you could have made a good living, probably a very good living, and had a quote normal fine life, but it did not resonate with you. And you listened to yourself and you moved along a path that is the right path for you. And, right away, I mean, it was just so I actually, I feel like we're almost like this is going to totally irritate your wife. And I don't mean it in any inappropriate way. But I almost feel like if how they'd say like sometimes like two halves of the same soul come in and go into different bodies. It's totally presumptuous and inappropriate for me to say it. But I've said this to Jason. I'm like, Damien and I are like, we could like talk for like 8 hours.
Just know my wife is very cool. Like we are, she would understand that completely. She's actually amazing. I can't believe you guys haven't like hung out yet.
No, I know. We still have to have you guys out for dinner now that we finally settled down a bit. But truly, like you just get things, and you're so intuitive and you're so thoughtful about the way you do things, and you're not afraid to sit down with somebody and literally tune into them. And it's funny because when we did the garden down the shore, I think you brought us a gift. You brought us witch hazel, which I thought was the coolest thing. You planted things like wormwood and things that, to me, and rosemary, and things that had not only historic but mystical significance. And that was so spot on. And a lot of times I go down and I see people's gardens who are nice, but they lack soul, and you can feel it. You garden with soul. It's inspired. And you intuitively tap into things people wouldn't even know to articulate. And when you create something for them, and it is more than just, oh, what a nice landscape, but they are transformative. They transform the look and the feel and the experience of being in a place in a multi-sensory, and I would say multi-dimensional way. You feel it. And it's hard to articulate. It's hard for me to articulate that well.
Oh, that's really nice of you to say. I mean, that's
true.
It's everything that I would hope for. I, not to fast forward at all, but when I got my degree the second time in philosophy, I wrote my final paper on landscape design being the purest and arguably the most important form of art. And the main reason being, and this is to the point that you're making about this spirit, this whatever this thing is, like I don't know how to define it, and I think it's elusive, and I think if we tried to define it, we would miss it. Which is a very Zen thing to say, but I think it's true. But it's pure because our art, I think, and this is arguable, but I think art's intention is to create a piece that will evoke some kind of, not invoke, but evoke some kind of emotional response, right? Whether good or bad. And the value judgment in particular isn't important. It just wants to get something out of you. Otherwise, if you created something in a black room and nobody ever saw it, I mean, maybe, there's, you can argue that there's something for you there too. But I just mean in general, I think art is for everyone. And the problem with art, and why I think Plato hated it, and didn't want to have anything to do with art and wanted it completely ejected out of his Republic, is because it's completely static. It's not a real representation of the way things are. Yes, it will create like a feeling, but that's not actually anything. I mean, he would argue that there's not really anything real going on there. Now, our world and nature and our experience is in flux. It's constantly in change. And how you as a person are constantly changing. Things around you are changing. How you interact with these things are constantly changing. So if there's a way and a method to create a changing, living work of art, to me, I can't think of anything purer. And to be able to be part of the creation, because it's not, I'm not creating things for people. I'm creating things in conjunction with where they want to be and feel. So when I have that client partner and we're able to create something beautiful, there is a kind of spirit there. There is something there that's palpable, that and that is the intention. That is the goal. So I think you nailed it right in the head. I mean, if there's anything, it's not money. Like I have a real hard time accepting money for my work, because that monetary value is so minimal compared to that result that you were just talking about. Understanding that, wow, there is something here that's much deeper than just like a bunch of plants in the ground and a few pieces of stone on the ground. So thank you for that. No, I appreciate it.
Oh, it's true. And, it's funny because when I was thinking, okay, what will we talk about tonight? I took a look at some of the eco-psychology research and there were so many things we could talk about. And it's not that we still can't, about, the beneficial effects of nature on, psychologically and physiologically, and, trends in urban design and design in different kind of realms. And it's not that that's not important, but I almost feel like maybe the direction of our conversation tonight is supposed to be deeper, because and for me, it's very hard to articulate these things with words. It's like, I know the feeling I have when I'm in a natural space that, again, feels like somehow in tune with itself, and where you're allowed to step into it and be in tune with it, right? But I almost feel like we're, hopefully a respectful guest, or maybe a respectful participant, but we aren't the driving force, right? Even if we think we are. That's kind of like what you're talking about, what that makes me think of. Like we're a small piece of a very interconnected larger system that I couldn't even imagine finding the boundaries to, in a way, right? Because, in nature, it's not that there's a defining end to an area necessarily. I mean, there is, but there isn't. I'm just kind of babbling now. But one thing I wanted to ask you, in terms of, and wherever you want to take this, but we think about landscapes, or I often do, as like the plant matter, trees, grasses, flowers, weeds, whatever. But clearly there's so much more to it. It's the animal life, the insect life, but also, hardscape, but in the broadest possible sense. It's water, the element of water. It's how wind moves through a landscape. It's how the sun moves across a landscape. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about any of that in whatever way comes to you.
If there's an opportunity to include any natural substance, because the reality is that, a created landscape will never match the things that just happen naturally. And I'm trying not to say the words by accident, because, I think that, like, the way things interact and the way they grow naturally is, it's one mind. And when you can go into, my family really loves to hike, and they just have that same, I see that same thing in them, where they're like, when you're not, like, for me at least, when I'm not focused on the fact that I'm exhausted, and you could take a second to just be in that environment and experience it for what it is, that connection is, it's there's nothing like it. And to try and recreate that in the landscape, like I said, it might be the purest form of art, but it's nothing like the real thing. That being said, if there were a way to integrate real water into land, I would do it every time. There's not an amazing way to do it properly. It's just unmatched when you could see water in nature. And I find that, my wife and daughter, especially, like, they look for water on hikes. Like, they go, my daughter more mountaintops, but my wife more looks for waterfalls and streams and things like that. And there's just such a powerful energy at these places that are just, you just can't recreate. It's just impossible. So, I do like the ideas of maybe, ponds and things like that, but I don't tend to use them too much because it just, I don't know, it just doesn't do the trick. There's no real way to pull it off in a way that doesn't look contrived. Like, you really, really tried to make it that way, So maybe, maybe that's just something I need to work on. I don't know. I mean, it just might be a deficit in the way I design, but I haven't found a tasteful way to do that yet.
And, listen, I think everybody brings their own particular soul to what they do. So I don't think it's a deficit. Don't say it's, you have to be true to what you're noticing and what resonates with you. And listen, I get that, clients, I'm sure, ask for a whole variety of things. And I know we did too. We had a house that was really close to the street and we needed another walkway. You brought soul even to that, or you made a tiny yard have a variety of moments, and it was just very evocative and yet went together so beautifully, even though it, by definition, it was contrived, right? Because it would not have just arisen there.
Well, I guess it was around 2005, 2006, I picked up this book just in Barnes and Noble, and it was a husband and wife team, landscape architects, and it was, I forget the name, something corny like Landscaping to the Sky or something. I don't know. And it, they talked about they broke apart the way they designed a residential landscape into important pieces. And I think they're important things to think about while you're designing, because there is a functional aspect to every landscape. Like, you certainly couldn't plant a wildflower garden when you need to pull your car into a driveway. It has to, there has to be some kind of function there. But one of the things that they spoke about, which I thought was interesting, and they unapologetically said it, is that every piece of land has a spirit to it. And again, they were like, it's not definable. But when I read this, I actually started to do this every time. And they said that you need to sit in a space and really try to, for lack of better words, feel what that land, that property, that piece wants as well. And whatever that might mean in particular, I'm not sure. But I know it has enough of a substance to it that I do it. And somehow it does help contribute to the overall design. And that was, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because that absolutely happened on that one property that you're talking about. I could just remember standing in front of your front door and just feeling like all of the, for lack of better words, energy of the property was just slammed up against the front of the house. And
yes,
a big intuition, a lot of people would say, well, let's put up a barrier. And I don't think that idea ever prevents energy from being caught up in a space. I'm doing this. I'm holding it down below the camera, but I'm doing this. But like, it's the same idea with, when people plant a row of emerald green arborvitae smack up against a fence because they don't want to see their neighbors. They don't realize that they can, for the same price, plant a whole array of different growing things in a different configuration that will actually block their view even better, and not be pruned by the deer at night. But all that to say, when you open up the space, somehow you are opening up, widening that energy, and you feel it. Like you really do. I mean, I often, if people ask me about that particular thing that you're talking about, I use that your house at that time as an example of that, because the second we pulled the curb line away from the front door and opened up the parking area in the front, it was like, oh, it almost like felt like taking off a turtleneck in hot weather.
100%. And something that I want to say, some people know that, my husband is in real estate, so it's something that we think about, but for us, that's a soul kind of thing too. It's not like every place has its particular fingerprint or energy print, and it's things that are good as they are and could be better, or things that are really challenging. When you create a landscape and it's thoughtful and it's meaningful, and you kind of work with what you're describing, that intuitive kind of approach to working with the energy of the place, I'm going to tell you, it shifts not only your own ability to enjoy it, but your ability to find the next people to enjoy it. And it's crazy what a difference it makes. And to me, it's kind of like the external feng shui of working with a place, because we've been in many places where we did not do everything that we wanted to do, but the things that we did do created enough of a shift that other people who had passed by them a million times and not noticed them saw something different. I feel like that's when you're working with energy in general, that's the case. And again, there'll be people who listen to this will be like, that sounds a little bit far out there. Although people probably are used to that if they're listening to this podcast. But it's really true.
I think the biggest win for me is when other people, if I get a report back that, I had my family over for Christmas and they went and sat out on this stone bench that you installed and they didn't leave for like an hour and a half. And they're not normally people that introspect. That's a huge win, is when you have people that normally aren't sensitive to the space and they're affected by it. And they'll deny it, and they'll say like, "Oh, you were having a time out there." I'd be like, "No, I just, smoking," and you're like, "No, I saw you. You were enjoying the space, and that's another. I mean, obviously, it's great when the people you're designing for have that experience, but when their circles are also undeniably having that experience without being asked to have that experience, it's confirmation.
Damian, I want to be mindful of your time because I know that you actually have something after this, but I wanted to just quickly ask you if there is anything that we didn't cover that we should touch on. And if it's anything big, we can meet again and do another interview, because I would love to have you back. Anything that we should have, or anything you want people to know that we haven't touched on?
I think, I mean, I feel like I've said too much.
Never too much.
No, I mean, the only thing I would probably want to do is shamelessly plug my plant store, if that's okay.
I want you to.
Yeah. So it's cityplantsonline.com. So right now it's houseplants.
So cityplantsonline, all one word.com.
Yep.
And I'll put it in the show notes. But tell us a little bit about your new endeavor.
Yeah. So, I'm starting with just indoor tropical plants. I have a greenhouse. I am cultivating these plants in bonsai trees. And then I just ship them out, and I manufacture my own planters. It's urban themed, so all my planters are made of concrete, lightweight concrete. And, from there, like I mentioned, I do, through that company, offer my design services as well. But, like I mentioned before, my intention is, I just, I'm in the process of signing a deal with direct ship nurseries.
Oh, wow. That's
So I should
amazing.
be able, yeah, I'm very excited about that. And that will be huge, is to be able to, anything you can imagine, fruit trees, evergreens, um, flowering trees like crepe myrtles, cherries, you name it, you can order it through me and it will show up at your doorstep. So, what that means for folks is, you could reach out to me directly. I could, even through photos and property surveys, create a real. I mean, obviously, it'd be better to be in the space, like we had mentioned, but I can create a simple design and ship all the plant material, and you and your brothers and sisters can go out and plant it and have that experience. Because I really do believe there's nothing like actually getting out there and doing it, putting that plant in the ground and watching it grow. So, and it,
100%.
at again, not to try to shamelessly plug this, but one of the great things I think about this idea is it's considerably cheaper than hiring a landscaper. Now, obviously, you have to invest a little bit of labor, but one of my, like, not to stand too tall on my soapbox, but one of my biggest problems with our culture and society and how we monetize people. And there's, a large abuse of labor, particularly in landscaping.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think this is a really good opportunity for people to kind of capture back some of the costs that are being raked away, because the margins between growers and the end user, the client, the customer, is huge. And I can start to close that gap for people, I think, even better than, say, like a Home Depot or Lowe's, who are pretty much dominating the industry right now, which is scary because it's not great material all the time. But that's it. That's my thing and my shameless plug. And I really appreciate you allowing me to do that.
Oh my God. And please, it's important because honestly, what you can do, I mean, you have an eye and you have a connection to what you do. And it's something most of us really don't have in the same way. And you absolutely can take photographs or a property survey and come up with a beautiful design, great plant recommendations that will work well with each other and work with your climate and so forth. And for people to actually get outside and spend time in nature. You don't even need us to say that the research does support that it's beneficial. It helps people's moods. It helps people physically feel and do better. But it's true. And I love that you can help people make that work easier and more enjoyable. So, Damian, without further ado, I'm going to let you return to your evening because unbelievably you have another meeting after this. But thank you so much for everything. Honestly, it's always so great to see you. I love speaking with you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks so much.
Please say hi
really
to your family. Definitely.
I will. And say hello to Jason.
I will.
And Loretta.
Oh, well, Loretta's in the spirit world, but she's definitely still around.
Right. Sorry. Yes.
No, that's okay. She's still here, actually. She is.
Good.
So great to see you. This has been another episode of Unpacking Possibility. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like, share, follow, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And as always, until next time, be well.